Right, so here we are, yet another interview with another fantastic punster. This week it is, or I don't know if it's a week anyway, whatever it is. I'll edit that bit out, don't worry. It is Tony Cowards. Welcome, Tony.
Hello, thanks for having me on here.
No worries at all. How you doing, man?
I'm all right, thank you. Yeah, not too bad. Doing okay after the weird times that we've been living in. Yeah, things are looking good at the moment.
They're looking good. So how have you been sort of dealing with these sort of weird times and then sort of the retransition, if you like, into what we think might be normality again?
God, I don't know. Like everyone, I think it's been very up and down, and just been dealing with it, trying to just keep mind and body and soul together, like deal with family stuff, and gigs are starting to come back now. I did my first live gig just the Wednesday just gone, which was interesting. It was like the most nervous I've felt at a gig in years. It was really like an interesting experience. It was a bit weird going back on stage, but it was great fun, and it went not too bad.
Yeah, so was it almost a bit like sort of the first time you've been on stage type thing again, or how were the nerves sort of?
Yeah, it was like going back to my. I'll be honest with you. I was like when I first started comedy, I was very nervous. For the first 100 or more times before I got on stage, I was incredibly nervous, and I don't really know what kept making me get back on, because it was a horrifying experience every time, just with the nerves. So yeah, it was a little bit like that again, and I hadn't felt nerves like that for a good 10 years perhaps.
Yeah,
it was quite interesting. I think it was mainly because it's the longest time I've gone without doing a gig. I don't think I'd previously gone more than about 2 weeks possibly without having a gig for the last sort of 10 to 15 years. So yeah, it was quite a weird experience.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be. So I mean, like, you're talking sort of like you used to get sort of like really nervous kind of before you go on stage or whatever. Have you got any sort of like pre-gig rituals that you go through before you go on stage? Are you one of these guys that maybe are you the mumbler in the corner? Are you the chatty one? Are you the kind of one that's going to the toilet every 2 seconds? Like, is there anything you sort of particularly do yourself like before a gig?
I think I'm all of the above. Different. That sounds like different stages. No, it's weird. I've tried to have little routines. This is probably going to sound really stupid, but for a little while I did. The kind of conservative power stance that you used to see all the MPs doing, that spread their legs kind of power stance thing.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that was really good for making you feel confident. So I used to do that before. I used to stand with my legs apart and my arms wide out, and basically making myself like a star. And I'd stand there and kind of lean backwards a little bit to open my lungs. And it's supposed to be kind of almost like a yoga type thing that fills you with confidence.
Right.
So I did do that. I don't know if that worked. I don't know why I stopped doing that. Probably because I looked a right dick in the green room.
Everything's going, what the fuck's he doing, man?
Yeah, everyone was like, "What the hell is Cowards up to?" But yeah, no, I usually a toilet, at least one toilet visit a few minutes before I go on, because I think that's important. As I'm getting older, 20 minutes or half an hour, whatever I've been booked for, is a long time to go without having a wee. So I always make sure I've done my ablutions beforehand. But yeah, no, I think I've gone through various kind of routines, pre-gig routines in the past, but I'm not sure I really have one at them now.
Right. So what was it that you'd say that first got you into comedy? Why did you sort of think, right, stand up, that's something I'm wanting to do?
Well, I've always loved comedy. As a little kid, I used to watch all of the kind of comedy stuff on TV, which was obviously sort of, I'm child of I was born in the 70s, but child of the 80s really. And back then it was mostly all kind of sitcoms and sketch shows and that sort of thing. There wasn't that much stand-up on telly, apart from, I suppose, people like Dave Allen. So I was always a big fan of those. And then in the 90s, I lived in London, and the 90s were kind of the big stand-up comedy boom. You had Newman and Deal had just done a kind of big show at Wembley, which was the biggest. I don't know if it still is, but it held the record for the biggest stand-up comedy show audience-wise. And so there were loads of comedy clubs in London, and I used to go and watch those. I got really into it. I saw people like Jimmy Carr and Tim Vine when they were sort of first starting out, and just really got into comedy. And then in the sort of early 2000s, my friend at work started running a comedy night in North London with a friend of his. It was a place called the Comedian's Graveyard in Wood Green, which was fantastic. And I used to go along there. And I started off just going along to watch, gradually got roped in to help various things, like help them with the running the door and selling the tickets, and then doing the sound and light sort of cues for them. Because they used to run, they did it, it was mostly stand-up, but they did it all a bit like, it was a bit like the Muppet Show, in that it was they had songs and sketches part way through it as well. It was kind of one, it was that sort of thing. Like, there was more to it than just the stand-up show. There was this whole show happening around the stand-ups coming in on and off. So that was great. And then I got roped in to help them with a sketch one time. And that was kind of my first time on stage doing stand-up. Well, not stand-up, it was sketch comedy, but kind of got me on stage. And then kind of got the bug a little bit, I think. And one of the things I kind of always say to people that inspired, people say to me, oh, which comedians inspired you to do stand-up? And it kind of, in a way, it wasn't, I mean, they had some really great acts there, and it wasn't the people that were really good. It was, they had the open mic section in the middle, and it was seeing some of the people doing the open mics that obviously weren't quite so good. Let's be diplomatic about it. And I was kind of more inspired by them, because I thought, well, I can be just as bad as that.
Yeah.
Like, if they can get up and do that, I could probably do that. But I think that's the thing, isn't it? When you first start and you look at the really good people and you think, oh my God, I don't know how I'd ever be as good as that. Yeah. But then you look at people starting out who obviously haven't developed their skills yet, and you go, well, I can be as good as that.
Yeah. So if you sort of see the low bar, then it's something to build from, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, but just when you mentioned there about some of the people that you'd went and see, you mentioned Jimmy Carr and Tim Vine. Obviously, either like pun, one-liner comics. Was it always puns and one-liners that you were interested in, or is that how you started out as a comic?
It's interesting, because that's what I've gravitated to now. Obviously, when I first started, like a lot of comics, I hadn't developed any particular style. I was just chucking as much in as I could possibly think that was funny. So I had a few little one-liners, but I had stories and anecdotes. I was partly observational. Just basically, you know, when you start, you're chucking in anything to fill your 5 or 10 minutes that you've been booked for. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting that I've mentioned those guys, isn't it? But I saw all sorts of other people. I saw loads of great acts, Bill Bailey, and I one of Hattie Hayridge from Red Dwarf, I remember seeing quite early on. So, I mean, there were loads of good acts, but yeah, I think I was always kind of drawn. I mean, Tim Vine was always my favourite. I'd quite often travel all around London to see Tim Vine when he was doing a show. And so, yeah, I think even as a kid, I used to have all those little kids' joke books, you know, with all the, they all used to have this similar variations on the same jokes, but I used to collect all those joke books, and I loved all those just silly little jokes. So I think it's kind of always been there a bit. I have a bit of a passion on the one-liners and the daft puns and wordplay jokes.
So do you have like a particular technique for like writing puns or one-liners or anything like that? A particular way you approach it?
Yeah, it depends. Most of the time, if I'm not under any real pressure, it depends whether I've got any pressure to write jokes, like if I've got a show coming up, like an Edinburgh show or something, or if I've been asked to write for other people, then it tends to be a bit more structured. But usually what I tend to do is I've got one of those brains that is just always collecting bits of language. I think I call myself a bit of a language magpie. I'm always, if I listen to the radio or watch TV or I hear a distinctive phrase, it gets lodged in my brain and then percolates sort of when I'm walking the dog or whatever. My brain's just thinking like, oh, that phrase, how could that phrase be kind of misconstrued, or how could it have a double meaning, or how could it mean something else? And then and of course now you've always got I've got my phone on me all the time, so I can quickly make a note of anything that comes into my brain.
Mhm.
The one problem I have, like a lot of comedians, is I also get a lot of ideas for jokes when I'm driving home after a gig, because you're high on adrenaline and everything. And of course you can't. I've got a voice kind of. I had to start using voice memos, because you can't be trying to type in the idea for a joke as you're driving along the M1. So yeah, I mean, mostly it's quite organic. It's just ideas for jokes. I've got tons and tons of notebooks though, and what they're full of is like I say, little pieces of language where I think there's a potential for a joke or a pun. So that kind of tends to be how it works. If I'm actually under a bit of pressure, if I'm writing for someone else or I'm writing for a project that's got a deadline, then you kind of have to force it a little bit more. So what I tend to do then is I'll write. If say it's a bit like when we do the pun off, actually, when you've got a topic, say the topic's, I don't know, geography or something. Someone wants loads of jokes on geography. You
Or
kind of write
Eurovision.
down. Sorry.
Or
Eurovision today, wasn't it? Yeah, that was a tough one, wasn't it? But like, what I'll do is I'll kind of write down any words I can think or any things I can think that are associated with Eurovision. So if I was doing, say, Eurovision, you write down ABBA, maybe Bucks Fizz, Null Pois, Graham Norton, whatever you associate Terry Wogan back in the day, my age. But you'd write down all the things that you can. That's your first stage, is to collate all the information you've got about that subject. And then rather than just looking at trying to make jokes on the one word or the one thing Eurovision, then you're trying to make jokes obviously on all the different things. So you can have a look at all the subjects around it, and then see if you can get a joke out of those. I've never actually done it, but people sort of say about writing spider diagrams, and I think that's kind of how my mind works anyway. I have like spider diagrams in my head where each word is connected to a different word that's kind of semi-related to it. And you kind of obviously jokes like lots of things are all about connections between things, and you're finding connections between words and ideas. So I think if I was going to say to someone, I'd like to try and visualize how I write them, I think spider diagrams would probably be the way I could visualize it.
So you're talking about like you've got like notebooks sort of like scribbled with little ideas. Do you often go back to let's say, don't know how many you've got, but how many other notebooks you've got, and then just sort of open up and say, right, I think I could work with this? Or I mean, has much come from you just sort of like writing down a little phrase, forgetting about it for weeks, years, months, whatever, and you've went back to it? Like how much sort of material, or how often do you go back to your kind of old scribblings, if you like, and sort of try and work on something there from a fresh perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's what I tend to do is I've got loads of notebooks. So like, I don't know, it must be a dozen or so of different notebooks, all sort of with various bits and pieces of. Some have got like full jokes, some have just got ideas, and all the ramblings in between. And what I tend to do is if I'm struggling, if I've had a period where I've not really written a joke for ages, or I'm slightly worried that I'm not writing enough jokes, or I've got, like I say, a project I'm working towards, then I'll look through some of my notebooks and I'll go through them. And it's amazing, especially the ones from quite early on when I started comedy, because I think when you start off in comedy, you have ideas, you have good ideas. Your ideas, I don't know that your ideas ever get better or worse as you get more experience, but your ability to turn those ideas into actual jokes obviously gets much better. So some of the ideas I had when I first started comedy were really good ideas for jokes, but obviously I didn't at the time have the skill or the experience to know how to turn that into a decent joke. So I think quite often it's quite good to go back to your really early stuff, because the other thing is quite often it's fresh as well. Sometimes, I mean, quite often, like you said, years is right. Some of it is like I've had ideas for jokes in notebooks for 10 years or more that I haven't been able to do anything with, but then I'll look back on it and all of a sudden I'll look at it with fresh eyes, and the joke will be completely fresh because I'll have forgotten that idea completely. It's almost like getting someone else to write those ideas for you and then giving them to you. It's kind of,
well, I suppose in a way it is really, because you've written that as pretty much an amateur or an inexperienced comic, certainly. And then you're going back at it, as you say, maybe years later with a more experienced eye. So yeah, I suppose
Yeah,
it is
absolutely.
almost like someone sort of feeding you ideas. It's a different
Yeah,
level of experience feeding you ideas, certainly.
yeah, and also, I mean, you have different ideas at different points in your life, don't you? When I was a 30-year-old sort of comic, or in my 30s doing comedy, I was probably having slightly different ideas to now I'm sort of in my 40s.
Mm.
So yeah, you've got slightly different perspective
Yeah.
on things. So yeah, I mean, people sometimes ask me about writing comedy, and one of the most important things I always say is don't never chuck anything away. Don't chuck any ideas away. If try and I know sometimes you have to physically reduce space if you're moving house or whatever, but try not to.
Mm.
At least if you're going to chuck a notebook out, make sure you've at least transposed most of the information, put it on your laptop or something, or put it somewhere just so you can look at it. Never, because I have this slight philosophy as well that there's no. It sounds a bit weird, but I don't think there's such a thing as a bad joke. People talk about bad jokes or someone's got. I genuinely don't, because one of the things is I love Tim Vine, right? I love
Mhm.
Tim Vine, but if you analyse some of his jokes, you might say some of them are quite bad jokes.
Mhm.
But like when Tim Vine delivers them, they make me laugh every time. Doesn't matter the actual quality. Written
Yeah.
down, maybe they wouldn't be that funny, but when he performs them,
Mhm.
they make me laugh loads. I mean, I know it's not to everyone's taste, but
Mhm.
I don't think there's such a thing as a bad joke. I think when people talk about a bad joke, it's just a joke that's either not been written quite as well as it should be, or not delivered in the correct way, or
Mhm.
maybe it's just the wrong person was telling it.
Yeah.
The jokes themselves are neither, in a way, it sounds weird, but they're neither good nor bad. They're just the joke is just the joke.
Mhm.
And it's just about finding the right place for it, the right person to deliver it, or the right way of delivering it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, sort of creativity and sort of time and sort of patience and experience as well. Sometimes is going into sort of
Yeah,
writing a joke, and sometimes it's about finding where that joke fits within a
yeah,
certain set. I mean, I know
yeah,
certainly
absolutely.
if I've done like tens, maybe 15s to a point, but certainly not more than that. Within a 10 or 15, I've got a kind of pretty tight one anyway. If I'd insert a new joke into that, then the other ones on either side of it may have a different reaction to the audience. So,
Yeah,
so I suppose it is about sort of like finding the correct placement for sort of certain jokes. And as you say, there's no such thing as a bad joke, just bad placement of a joke.
yeah. I think generally at the core of every joke, whether you'd consider it in inverted commas a bad or a good joke, at the core of every
Mm.
joke, there's a funny idea that just needs to
Mm.
be sort of hatched, if that's the correct metaphor.
Yeah.
Um, in the right way. It needs to be, like you say, you can have a joke that on its own maybe doesn't get much of a laugh, but you stick that
Mm.
joke along with another couple of jokes that it kind of relates to. All of a
Mm.
sudden, you've got a really funny part of a routine, which on
Yeah.
its own wasn't very funny. Or, like you say, sometimes it's just a position in a set, a joke that perhaps wouldn't work very well as your first joke
Mm.
might work brilliantly in the middle of your set or
Yeah.
as your final joke, even.
Mhm.
Um, So yeah, I think that's why comedy is so fascinating, because there's just so many variables to so many
Mm.
aspects of it, and there's never like there. I would try and say this to people. I occasionally do comedy workshops and things, and run and sort of I've taught sort of school children and stuff how to do comedy, and I always say to them, I'm going to tell you some rules of comedy, but
Mm.
all of these rules can be broken. There are like virtually everything you could tell someone to do that they need to do to be a comedian. You can find a comedian who breaks that rule and is still really, really funny,
Yeah.
or is even funnier because they break that rule. So it's really hard to teach comedy in a way,
Mhm.
because it's not like do X and Y and it will be really funny. Because
Mhm.
sometimes not doing those things will be even funnier.
Yeah. Mhm. It's just, I mean, I suppose it's just like a blank canvas, really. I mean, all you really need is a pencil. It depends what you do with the pencil. It's about yourself as an individual and what you can sort of bring to the canvas stroke stage type thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's all about expressing your funniness, the way
Mhm.
you're funny.
Mhm.
It's no good. I know there's a bit of a cliche, and people will say about comedy classes, comedy courses. I did a comedy course when I was a new comedian, and there was a bit of a snobbery about doing comedy courses because there was this assumption that they just churned out identikit comedians that all kind of did the same thing. But certainly the course I did was certainly not like that at all. It was all about finding your way of being funny, and accentuating every individual person's kind of the funny part of their personality. And so, yeah, that's I think that's what the best comedians do. Is they obviously, most comedians aren't the same as they are on stage. They'd be impossible to live with if they were. But it's about finding a certain aspect of your personality and exaggerating it for the comedic effect.
It up. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally. Yeah. What would you say was the best gig that you've ever done, or the one that certainly sticks in your mind anyway?
It's a bit funny with comedians. I don't know if you've had this with other interviews, but comedians tend to we're a bit of a bad bunch for focusing on the negatives. So I can remember tons of bad gigs, and I'm sure you'll probably ask me about them in a minute. But I don't remember the good gigs as well, which is really annoying, because without wanting to sound arrogant or anything, I've had plenty of really good gigs, but they, for some reason, they don't stick quite as well in your memory as the gigs where you have an absolute shocker. But one that I'm always quite proud of is I managed to get onto an amazing lineup for a charity gig one time that was at the Bloomsbury Theatre. And I was by far and away the least well-known person on the bill. I think I was probably the only person that didn't have my own TV show, because it was basically like John Bishop, I think Milton Jones was on, Al Murray was on, Stuart Lee, Shappy Kasandi. It was just a ridiculous lineup, and I was on. And I had a really good gig and did really well. And I was worried that I was going to be the sort of weak link of the evening, and I held my own. I'm not going to pretend that I was the best on the night, because I certainly wasn't. But I didn't look out of place amongst that sort of company, and that was probably one of my proudest kind of moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sounds like a cracking experience.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah. So you sort of preempted it just a little moment ago.
It's everyone's favourite question, isn't it? Yeah, make the comedian relive the car crash that they had.
Because that's the thing, as you say. I mean, you might sort of pinpoint one or two great gigs that you thought, right, I'll always remember the feeling from that or whatever. But the overriding feeling of when something just does not work, or you just completely die in your hole, that lives with you a little bit more sort of poignantly. Definitely. And the mediocre gigs, they're in limbo. One end to the other, really. So sort of when it comes to worst gigs, or gigs that you would just, in hindsight, you'd rather not have done, what would some of those be for you?
It's funny, really, because obviously, like all comedians,
well, obviously it wasn't funny if it was a bad gig.
Well, no, I wasn't funny on the night, but no, I've had plenty of absolute shockers, but they're kind of, I don't know, they're kind of your war wounds. They're kind of your war stories. I mean, all comedians, when they're in a car share together or they meet up for a drink, no one wants to talk about all the good gigs. Everyone wants to talk about what was your worst gig, or worst heckle you've ever got, all that sort of thing. For me, the one that really sticks in my mind is I got booked for a very famous holiday camp. I won't name them, but it rhymes with Mutlins. I was booked to do a gig for them, and I hadn't been doing comedy that long, and I probably, if I was lucky, I had a good 15 to 20 minutes, and they booked me to do 40 minutes, but the money was quite good. And I thought, I can do 40 minutes. And they said to me, it needs to be family friendly. And I thought, okay, that's not too bad. I do mostly fairly clean jokes. I can do family friendly. Assuming that what it meant was that there was going to be there might be a few children in the audience, like teenagers or a few kids. But when I turned up, first of all, it was in one of their absolutely massive rooms. There was like 2,000 people in this massive room. I was the only comedian on, which can always be trouble. I had to follow a band who'd been on and then I think there was like a juggler or something on after me. But so I was the only comedian on. And when they said family friendly and that there might be kids about, what they actually meant was the entire front row was going to be like toddlers with their mums, and the toddlers just going crazy because the mums were just there for their night out. So they were just letting the kids run wild at the front of the stage. Then there was all the mums sat in the middle, and then all the dads were basically at the bar getting absolutely hammered. So yeah, I started off, and for 10 minutes I sort of did okay. I kind of held my own, and then I started to struggle a little bit. And wow, it flipped just quickly. Like as soon as the audiences are a bit like a pack of lions, aren't they? In the Serengeti, if they can smell weakness, then they're on you. So they could. The audience seemed to know that I was starting to struggle a little bit, and then heckles just started coming from everywhere. Like you can imagine 2,000 people, and just all the men at the bar who'd obviously had a bit too much to drink, just suddenly shouting at me. So I was trying to deal with all that, all in the back of my mind, and people were swearing at me. People were going, sort of shouting all sorts of stuff at me. But in the back of my head was like, oh my God, I was told not to swear. Don't swear. Don't swear. So that was kind of overriding any creative thought I had about trying to put down a heckle, because I was just paranoid about swearing in front of this sea of kids. But I thought, I've been booked to do 40 minutes. I've got to do 40 minutes. So I soldiered on just through this sea of like apathy in the middle and just hatred at the back for all the pissed up guys just shouting abuse. And I started to carry on. I got to about 20, 25 minutes, and it was almost getting to the stage where there was going to be a riot, because they just wanted me off stage. They were quite happy to have an empty stage as long as I wasn't on it. And I tried to be honest with the audience. I thought it'd be funny if I said to him, look, I've got to do 40 minutes because I'm contractually obliged to do 40 minutes. And I said, if I don't do 40 minutes, I won't get paid. And I said to him, trying to make a joke of it, I said, but if you guys really hate me that much, if you want to have a whip round, and if you can like raise enough money, like you can buy me off. Which I thought would be funny, but they took as the cue to throw money at the stage, like throw coins. So I got like a bit of a barrage of small change thrown at the stage, and I started gathering it up because I thought that would be quite funny. So I gathered up about £1.50 in small change, and then the redcoats realised that if I stayed on stage for much longer, they were going to have to call the police or something because there was going to be an incident. So I got shepherded off. They cut the mic, and I got shepherded off by a redcoat who just like. And then I was kind of like, you know, when you see like someone who's a master criminal being taken to court, you know, and they're hidden under a blanket and then smuggled out the back into.
You had a red coat over your head.
Yeah, that was kind of how I was kind of smuggled out the back of the thing. I just had a quick word with the Ents manager, the bloke that had booked me, who just told me in no uncertain terms was I not going to be doing the gig at their other branch that I would booked in for a few weeks later, and that basically I kind of had to go off, kind of shamefaced, out the back entrance to my car, and then drive home. And now it's. I won't point out exactly where it is, but people will know. It's off the M5 on the way down to the southwest. That's where it was. And every time I'm on the M5 and there's a little sign for that particular place, it kind of causes me a little shudder and a little laugh as I just see that, and the memories come flooding back. So
what would you say that you sort of learned from that experience, and that you were sort of booked for this? I'm assuming from what you've told, it's certainly one of the biggest sort of bookings.
Oh, it was one of the, it probably still is one of the biggest ones I've done actually. But yeah, it was certainly the biggest at the time. What have I learned from that? Never to go back to there, even 10 years later. No, I think I learned to try and be more prepared, better prepared for things. I think I was caught up. I'm not long into my comedy career, and I thought, yeah, I can do that. Of course, I can do that. And I kind of was trying to wing it a little bit on kind of naive optimism that I'd be able to do that. And now I'm a bit more realistic sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think now I probably would. I'd speak to the person booking me a lot more about like because I didn't ask any questions about it. I just took the gig. I didn't like think, oh, would I be the only comedian on? Because
Yeah.
I don't know. People that are not involved in comedy might not know, but if you're the only comedian on a bill, it's much trickier than if you're a comedian in amongst a load of other comedians on a
Yeah.
comedy night. A comedian following a band is hiding to nothing. Like, especially if there's people been like dancing away on the dance floor to the band, and then it suddenly all gets cleared, so that a comedian can come on.
Yeah. It's like the whole comedian at a wedding type thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that can be.
Yeah. Comedy really only works when people are prepared for comedy. They're there to see comedy. It's like corporate as well. When you get booked to do a corporate gig, and they're all there just to get pissed at the end of the year, you know, and see what bonuses they're getting and all that. They're always at hell for the comedian because you're put on as a bit of an afterthought, and no one's actually there to see a comedian. So yeah, comedy mostly only ever works if everyone's there specifically to see the comedy.
Yeah, and just otherwise it can be. Well, I mean, I suppose it can be a learning experience, certainly from a kind of a set building point of view type thing. Because I mean, there are people that just sort of smash corporates all the time.
Yeah,
but it's
well,
their kind of style, you know.
I also think with those sort of things, corporates are slightly different. But I think even with corporates and with kind of holiday camps and those sort of what I'd call sort of more mainstream sort of entertainment places, I think what works much better is if you're not just a comedian, but you're kind of a bit more of an all-round entertainer. So someone who does comedy magic that can involve the audience, get people up on stage, or you know, ventriloquism, or someone who does comedy songs, comedy musician. Those sort of people kind of have a bit more of a chance because they're able to involve the audience and change the gear a little bit, and that sort of thing. Someone like me who just goes up and tells jokes for 40 minutes. That's a long time to listen to jokes.
Yeah,
people
and
kind
I don't
of
know
switch off.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd find as well, but certainly in the sort of the longer sets, your sort of 30, 40 an hour long sets, if it's not or if it is going well, then you can just absolutely rattle through it, and sometimes you don't tell half the jokes maybe because it's going so well. But when it's not going well, an hour gig can easily be done in about half an hour.
Oh man, yeah. Another one I always remember is I got booked to do a festival in Northampton. It had been organised by the Northampton Council, and it was just on the back of a flatbed truck in the middle of a field.
Right.
And there was all the families sat around. And again, this is probably a lesson I should learn. Never do get booked. Never do a 40-minute gig. Never say yes to a 40-minute gig, because I'd been booked for this one to do 40 minutes as well. And I remember I'd specifically planned out 40 minutes of material. I had enough jokes to fill 40 minutes, and I got on this flatbed truck and looked out, and it was just complete sea of apathy. Everyone was having like a picnic in this field. No one was looking at the stage. No one was really listening. No one was paying attention particularly. And I was trying to engage people, and no one wanted to talk to me even. So I just had to rattle through jokes. And I got through the entire 40-minute set that I'd planned in about 20 minutes. And then I looked at my watch and I thought, oh shit, I'm only about halfway through. What am I going to do for the next? Anyway, so it was there was quite a lot of kind of padding and floundering and trying to talk to people that didn't want to do audience banter.
That's where an extra banjo will come in handy and just
exactly. But when audiences, it's an interesting thing. I once did a gig where I kind of because the temptation is, if the audience aren't enjoying it, especially with one-liners, is you tend to speed up because you don't get the pauses for the big laughs, so you tend to rush from one joke to the next joke. And so another comedian actually pointed out to me one time that when you do that, what you're actually doing is giving the audience twice as much of what they're not enjoying. So
that's true.
So all you're doing is giving them more stuff that they're not enjoying. So you kind of, in a weird way, that's one of the things I suppose I've learned, is that you kind of just have to slow down and try and, even if there's not a big laugh, you've still got to have that pause, even if it's a slightly awkward pause. Just slow down, and in your mind constantly just be thinking, don't rush from joke to joke. Don't rush. Give them time to get on board. Because sometimes people aren't laughing because if you tell a joke really fast, they're not picking up all the bits of information they need. They're not getting the joke. And also there's something more compelling about, I suppose it's to do with like dramatic pauses and things, isn't it? If someone, I'll do it now, see if it works. Obama used to do it, didn't he, in his speeches? But if you talk slightly slower and in small, short phrases, it kind of draws the listener in and they kind of have to listen. But of course, it's totally contra to what you're feeling. You're feeling like you just want to rush and get to the next joke, to the next joke. The next joke will get them. The next joke will get them. Oh, that joke didn't get them. Get another joke out quick.
What I always think about is that certainly if it's not going well, each joke should have an audible full stop as opposed to a comma. Do you know what I mean? Sort of like, as you were saying, just sort of do the joke, stop a little bit, next. Stop, rather than comma, comma.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
It's funny you say that, because I genuinely agree. I think you're absolutely right with that. But it's also interesting, like when I said about no comedy rules are hard and fast, I also sometimes like I think most of your jokes you should do like that, with a definite stop and pause, wait for the laugh. But sometimes what can really get a laugh is if you just almost throw a joke away. You can't do that all the time, but if you've got a little joke that you just kind of say it almost as if it's not a joke, it kind of catches the audience out. They go, "Oh, hang on, that was really funny," but it's just like kind of almost threw that away. It comes across, I think, sometimes a bit more as like that you've ad-libbed it, that it wasn't a written line. Yeah. So while I think you're right, I think you should have a full stop. Occasionally, if you do one that's got a comma, it kind of, because comedy, especially doing one-liners, I think is all about changing the pace and changing the, because a lot of comedy is to do with surprise and just catching people out. And if you do loads of jokes that are all kind of, not that the jokes themselves are formulaic, but if the rhythm of it is quite formulaic, the audience will start to sort of tap into that little rhythm. And you need to kind of change that rhythm occasionally, just to shake them out of it, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So we're just kind of coming towards the end, I sort of think. Sort of when it comes to sort of like jokes, especially longer sets, like how do you memorize a wealth of jokes that you're going to do as a set?
My memory is pretty shocking, which is not good for a one-liner comic. But what I tend to do is I tend to group the jokes into kind of threes or fours, 3 or 4 jokes. Mostly they'll be related on a related topic, but not always. But just so that the jokes, so that I know, then if I remember the first joke, I know that jokes 2, 3, and 4 follow on to that one. So as long as then it's almost as I've only got to remember like a third or a quarter of my jokes, because I know it's almost like they're like mini routines. So you just remember the first joke, and hopefully your muscle memory kind of just kicks in. Your memory kicks in, and you just, the next 2 or 3 follow straight on. So yeah, I tend to break the set down into like little chunks, sort of memorize it that way. Occasionally, though, jokes will just kind of pop up all on their own, which you can just slip in sometimes, and especially if they relate to something. Because I've written so many jokes that I've got jokes on almost every subject kind of possible, but they're all hidden in there. I won't necessarily remember them all the time, but if there's been a bit of audience interaction and it's reminded me of a certain joke, then I'll pop that joke out, which is always good because it kind of looks to the audience like you've ad-libbed that joke, or you've kind of just made it up on the spot. They don't know that it's actually just this Rolodex of jokes in my head that happened to flip to the right one because that guy said he was a doctor or whatever, and then I suddenly do the doctor joke, or about visiting the doctor, and that's always good.
So what would you say is the favourite joke that you have written? Your favourite joke doesn't have to be a most popular one or one that's got the best reception, but your personal favourite.
Yes. Like, I think with jokes, it's like children, isn't it? You're not supposed to have any favourites. So I kind of love all of my jokes. I try to convince myself I love them all equally. One of my favourites is a joke that kind of only is a bit of a niche joke, so it doesn't kind of work all the time. But my favourite joke, I think, well, certainly the one that sticks in my memory is this one. It's like the hardest job I ever had in Hollywood was being the publicist for the film Fight Club. And see, you've laughed at that. It's good. Sometimes I have to then preempt the audience by going, because the first rule of being the publicist for the film. But yeah, it kind of relies on enough knowledge and on the film. But I like that. I just think it's a nice joke. And the people, it's one of those lovely jokes that the people that get it really find it funny, and the people that don't get it have no idea what's supposed to be funny about it.
And sometimes I suppose when that happens, it's like the people that do get it will laugh even more, because there are it's like I'm the smartest in the room type thing.
Yeah, it's like a special little club that they're part of. Yeah.
That you're not allowed to talk about.
Yeah.
Ironic.
Yeah, exactly.
So just in closing, what is your favourite joke that's not yours?
Oh God, there's loads, so many jokes. Like I say, I'm a big Tim Vine fan, so just some of it, like, he's just ridiculous, short, like Velcro. What a rip-off! It's just genius. I mean, what's that? Velcro, 4 words, is it? 4-word joke, which is, I think Jimmy Carr tried to find the shortest joke ever, and the shortest one he came up with was pretentious. What? So 2 words, kind of. But yeah, I love that. And Milton Jones had a joke which I used to love, and he doesn't do it anymore. And I don't know whether because it could be seen as slightly contentious, although it's completely not. It's just silly wordplay. But it used to go, I hate Italians with their slanty little eyes. No, not Italians, italics.
Yeah, I like.
And I think he probably dropped it because the setup, everyone's kind of like now is a bit like, oh, where's this going? But it's just a stupid joke about typography or fonts.
That's basically what it is. It's a whole punching up, punching down thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you very much, Tony Cowards, for coming on and having a chat with us. It's been a while, but it's absolutely flown by, man.
Well, thank you, mate. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Once you get me rambling on about comedy, I can't shut up. Sorry.
No, all is good. All is good. Thank you very much for joining us, Tony. See you soon.
Yeah, been a pleasure. Thank you.